Hello everyone, this video is called the Lewis and Clark Expedition, and we're going to take you on a little quest for knowledge about what Lewis and Clark is all about. So let's begin here. Just a little recap of the Louisiana Purchase, just in case you forgot from our last topic. Jefferson has now purchased Louisiana from France, and it's given us this gigantic sort of 800,000 square mile piece of land. And this purchase was barely even finalized when Jefferson started to think about exploring it. So as a result of the Louisiana Purchase, you have the size of the United States double, pretty much. Of this land that was added to the United States will eventually turn into 15 additional states in Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, New Mexico, Texas, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and Louisiana. At least parts of those 15 states came from the Louisiana Purchase, which is kind of crazy to think about. And when this was purchased, we didn't really know exactly what we were getting. We kind of bought it, and it was sort of like a mystery as to exactly what we bought. So obviously, when you buy something, you probably want to figure out what it is. Leads us to Lewis and Clark. So Lewis and Clark are two guys, actually their last names, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. They are going to explore the Louisiana Territory. It takes them about 3 years. They start in 1804 and they go to 1806. And this was the first time in history that we are going to send people from the United States all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So transcontinental expedition to the Pacific coast, at least for a United States person. All right, so the important stuff now. The goals of this trip. So first of all, there is this mystery out there that there is a waterway that goes from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean. It's called the Northwest Passage, or at least they think it's called that. It doesn't actually exist. So goal one was to find the most direct and practical water communication across the continent. They're hoping there'd be one way to get there. There is not, as they will find out. The second goal was to declare the U.S. sort of control over all the Native Americans that lived along the way. So basically, these Native Americans were living in Spain and then France, and now they were living in the United States. So we had to go tell them that they were now living in our country and that we were kind of in charge of them. And then finally, Jefferson was very interested in getting a sense of what existed, what kind of resources, creatures, what it looked like, all these different things as far as what the Louisiana Territory had. So those are the three goals of the trip. Here is a map of what it looks like. So here is Missouri right here, and this is the Mississippi River. Here is the Missouri River right here. So Lewis and Clark started in Missouri, and then they took the Missouri River up through the Louisiana Territory. So they traveled mostly by river. Again, they were looking for the quickest waterway to the Pacific. And along the way, they met all sorts of crazy stuff. And they eventually got to the Pacific up here, and then they had to go back. So we'll get to another map again in a little bit, but you see the basic trip that they took. So before Lewis and Clark could go on this expedition, Jefferson had to get permission to send them. So he asked Congress to fund this expedition. They had to pay for it and hire these guys. He wanted to explore the land, as we said. He received the permission in 1803, and the group that was going to explore was going to be called the Corps of Discovery, led by Lewis and Clark. He chose Army Captain Meriwether Lewis and another Army person named William Clark. They were the two people in charge of the journey. Again, this was a government-sponsored expedition, so they were being paid by the government and endorsed by the United States government to go do this. And that they went in 1804. So along the way, Lewis and Clark left Missouri with 45 men, and they went mostly by boat to gather information on the mapping, the resources, the animals, all sorts of different stuff. Along the way, some benefits that they had of this trip, some things they did well. They finally had a grasp on what they purchased. So after they were completed with this journey, the United States knew what they had. At the end of the trip, they had established a relationship between Native Americans and the United States, at least some kind of relationship. And then they also had provided 140 maps of the region. So when Lewis and Clark returned from this 3-year journey, they had accomplished all three of those goals. Okay, so in addition to Lewis and Clark and their many soldiers that were with them on the trip, there were some other interesting people or creatures along with them. So Lewis and Clark left, and they quickly met a man named Charbonneau, who was a French trader. They hired him as an interpreter because he could speak multiple languages. A bonus was that Charbonneau was married to this woman, you may have heard of her, named Sacagawea. And Sacagawea was an interpreter as well, and she spoke many Native American languages, including Mandan, which was important to the journey, and she also knew the area pretty well. So Charbonneau and Sacagawea joined the Corps of Discovery as guides and interpreters. Sacagawea was pregnant when she was hired or joined the Corps of Discovery, which is ridiculously crazy to think about, but she gave birth to a son named Jean-Baptiste along the way, and he was an infant on the journey over the time they were there. Crazy, I know. Along the journey was also a man named York, who was Clark's slave. He is an interesting addition to the trip because many Native Americans have never seen an African slave before, so he was sort of an interesting sight for many of the Native Americans along the journey. And there was also a dog on the trip. Lewis's Newfoundland dog joined the Corps of Discovery along the way. So finally, back to the map. You see the Corps of Discovery's complete journey one last time. Left St. Louis. Along the way, they met Sacagawea and Charbonneau. Made it all the way up to the river. They eventually had to cross the Rocky Mountains, which are here, which is where the Northwest Passage was not where they were expecting it, so they had to get out of the boats, cross the mountains, got back in the boats, made it all the way to the Pacific, and then went all the way back. Along the way, they had tons of crazy journeys and exciting adventures, as you can imagine, traveling through the middle of nowhere, and we will share more of those in class when we look at the journal entries of Lewis and Clark.